Hi and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing us how to make this beautiful dress with extended neckline in front. So you can see that the design showing on the outside is a different type of fabric. So I'm going to show you how to cut this directly on fabric. But if you're a beginner in sewing, I would advise that you do a pattern first. That's, you draft it on paper before transferring it to your fabric. So if you're new to my channel, you're welcome. Kindly click the subscribe button and click the bell so you get updates when I post new videos. And now let's get right into the tutorial. So because we have the design in front, we're going to be drafting out the back pattern first. I have some lines drawn out on my fabric. This is my shoulder line. I have my armhole line. That's my shoulder to armhole, what I call my armhole divided by 2, and that is where I normally insert my bust circumference. I have my shoulder to waist, I have my shoulder to hip, and then of course to the length of the dress, depending on how short or long you want your dress to be. Since we are drafting the back, I also made sure to put in my 1-inch zipper allowance from the fold of the fabric here, and I'm going with 1 inch. Now what I'm going to do right now is to go on to mark my neckline. Because of this design around the neck, I want to make sure that I have the neckline as wide as possible. But the first thing that we're going to do is to come right on this line. Now you can see that I'm marking from the zipper allowance so that I don't make any mistakes. I'm going to divide my shoulder into 2. So my shoulder is 16. 16 divided by 2 is 8 inches. I'm going to come right here and mark 8 inches. I'm going to repeat the same thing at the next line below. From the zipper allowance, mark 8 inches. And what I'm going to do is to draw a straight line across to join these 2 points. So the next thing I'm going to do is to mark my neck width. I'll be going with a neck width of 5 inches. Like I said, I want the neckline to be wide. So I'll mark 5 inches here. Neck depth is 3 inches. So I'll come right here, mark 3 inches. And then what I'm going to do is to connect my neckline with a curve like this. I'll come right here, mark 1 inch for shoulder slope, and then connect that to the neck width. Okay, you can use a ruler for yours, just make it straight. I'm going to come to this line here. As my bust circumference is 38. 38 divided by 4 is 9.5. So I'm going to come right here and mark 9.5. My waist is 33. 33 divided by 4 is 8.25. So I'll come to my waist and mark 8.25. You can see that I'm marking all these measurements from my zipper allowance line. So 8.25. I'm going to go to my hip. My hip is 41. 41 divided by 4 is 10.25. So I'm going to mark 10.25 right here. I'm going to deduct 1.5 from this and measure what I have after deducting 1.5 from 10.25. So that should be 8.75. So what I'm going to do is transfer that measurement, 8.75, to the bottom of my dress, and that is going to be the measurement I'm going to use for that part, and most of the time is usually around my knee area. So I'll just come right there, measure 8.75. All right, so once I'm done with that, all I need to do is to connect from the bottom of my dress to my hip, connect my hip to my waist, connect my waist to my bust. So once I'm done joining bust to waist, waist to hip, hip to bottom of my dress, I'm going to come right to this part. We're going to be drafting the armhole. All I need to do is to just create a curve around this point, connecting, the bust circumference divided by 4 to the straight armhole line here. So very, very simple, just like that. And then I'm going to be cutting out my fabric with a 1/2 inch seam allowance at my neckline, a 1/2 inch seam allowance at my shoulder seam, the armhole, and the side seam of the dress, making sure that I shape out my waist area and my hip area because those points are not sharp. You can use a French curve to smoothen, the connections here around the waist, around the hip, before going ahead to cut your pattern out. So guys, after cutting the back out, this is what I have now. I did a bit of readjustment for the neck width. Instead of using 5 inches, I changed it to 6 inches so that what I will have left here at the end of the day, that's around my shoulder, will be 2 inches. This is because of the neckline that I'm going for. That is why I made that adjustment, so that it is not going to be too tight on my neck. You can as well go on to adjust yours to even 1 inch or 1.5 inches. So I've placed the back pattern on another piece of fabric, which is going to be our front. And remember that I have seam allowance here. So from this point here all the way to the end, I have about 6.25 inches. So this is actually okay for this style. You can even make it shorter, you can make it longer. What I'm going to do next is to just come right here. I'm just going to trace out the armhole for the back that I have here. So just like this, and I'm going to cut it out. So we are sort of like making a one-off shoulder dress with elongated neckline in front. That is the design that we are going for. And if you notice, while cutting the front using the back, I made sure that I placed it 1 inch away from the center back so that I have my center front right here. So now that I have cut this out, what I'm going to do next is to come right here and trace the top line of our dress. That's the shoulder area inclusive of seam allowance. So I'm just going to place my ruler right here and just draw a straight line. I'm going to duplicate it at the other side so we know exactly what we are doing during this drafting process. Okay, so guys, here is the front. Okay, I've drawn that straight line across like I mentioned earlier. Right here is my armhole. Now I'm just going to take one piece of the front of the back, sorry. I'm going to place it, sort of like match it to this. So I'm going to place it on the front like this. And what I'm going to do next is to trace out the shoulder slope like this. Now at this point, I'm going to come down by 1/2 inch. I'm going to connect this 1/2 inch that I've marked here all the way to the end point on this my fabric. Okay, so this is the line right here. What I'm going to do next is to come to this point. Now I want my shoulder or the off shoulder to be around 3 inches. You can make it 4 inches. Okay, so I'm going to go with 3 inches. Okay, so I mark 3 inches there. I'm going to come in by 1/2 inch just to help us sew this very well, and I'm going to draw this 1/2 inch straight up. So now that I've done this, what I'm going to do is to cut the pattern out following the markings that I've made. Here is my shoulder slope. Cut out this diagonal part, cut this place down, and then into the side. So after cutting the top parts of the front bodice out, this is what we have. So this means that by the time we sew this dress, this part is going to come down like this. Okay, so can you see? This place will be off shoulder. Here is going to have full sleeve. What I'm going to do next is to now correct the back piece around the armhole area. So I need to make sure that it is matching correctly with the front. Okay, so I'm going to match the armhole, and then I'll mark the place that I'm going to cut using the front as a guide. Okay, guys, I want you to understand that here I marked 3 inches, and this is inclusive of my shoulder slope. So it means at the end of the day, what I would have removed here will be 2 inches, not 3. So I hope we understand that. Because of the shoulder slope, if I want to extend this a bit further down, I can go ahead and do that. Extend this by 1 inch, extend this part by 1 inch. So that is how much my off shoulder will be, or my shoulder will be off by. The next thing I'm going to do is to connect this to the center back area. So I'll just come right here and just connect it like this, and then cut out the back. So after cutting the back out, this is what I have. Now what I'm going to do is to grab this front piece. I'm going to be cutting the fabric that we are going to, or that is going to show on the right side. I'll be using this striped fabric for that, and what I'm going to do is to place it how I want it to show. Okay, so here is the back of my fabric, right here is the right side. So I'm going to place the wrong side on it like this. As you can see, by the time we flip it over, this is the part that is going to show. What I'm going to do is to cut this out using this fabric as my pattern. Then I'm going to come right here. I'm going to mark about 2 inch downwards here. Come to this part, mark 4 inch. Okay, I'm going to draw a straight line across on this fabric, then place my pattern correctly and cut out following this as a guide. So after cutting, this is what I have. What I'm going to do next is to place this on top of each other with right sides touching. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is to take this to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew this edge by 1/8 of an inch. Repeat the same thing here, 1/8 of an inch. Okay, and I'm going to stop right at this point here. So after sewing this part, I'm going to turn it right sides out and then give this a very good press. Okay, so now that I'm done sewing this piece of fabric and pressing it down, I'm going to place the back pieces on top of this front piece. Now for this side, I'll just take this to my sewing machine and sew the shoulder seam by 1/2 an inch seam allowance, joining this fabric together with this. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and sew the side seam with 1/2 an inch seam allowance. I'll repeat the same thing for this side, but because this other side is off shoulder, all I'm going to do is to just go on to sew the side seam by 1/2 an inch seam allowance. Please make sure to use a bias tape to conceal the raw edge of your neckline before actually going to sew your shoulder seam. Okay, so because I sewed this fabric facing by 1/8 of an inch, I sewed the bias tape onto this back piece by 1/8 of an inch, such that by the time I'm sewing the shoulder seam, it is going to be aligned, it's going to align properly. So now that I'm done with this, I've sewn the shoulder seam, I've sewn the side seam. The next thing that I'm going to work on now is the sleeves. I have tutorials on how to draft sleeve patterns, but if you already know how to draft your sleeve pattern, you can go ahead and use that, but I'll link my tutorial in the description box. Okay, so I've actually cut out my sleeves and I'm going to be combining 2 different pieces of fabric. So here is the part that is going to go to the top side of the fabric. Now for this remaining part, I'm going to be using this striped fabric for it, and I made sure to cut it sort of like with 1/2 an inch seam allowance here, so that by the time I join it together with this, it is going to be the same length. So guys, I'm not going to be hemming the bottom of this. As you can see, I actually cut it on fold. So this is what I have. I'm not going to interface this. The fabric itself is already thick, so I cut it on fold. Basically, I folded my fabric into 2 like this and then folded it into 2 again, as you can see. Then I used this pattern to sort of like cut this part out. Now what I'm going to do is to take this to my sewing machine. I'm going to bring the right sides out, simple as that. Then I'm going to join it together with the sleeves with 1/2 an inch seam allowance. So after sewing the sleeve pieces together, this is what I have. The next thing that I'm going to do is to place it with right sides touching like this, and then I'll go on to sew this part by 1/2 an inch seam allowance. I'll repeat the same thing for this one before I come show you guys how we are going to make one of the sleeves off shoulder. So after joining the seam of the sleeve, what we're going to do next is to convert one of them into off shoulder. So what I'm going to do is to just get the off shoulder part of my dress, and then I'm going to place it around the curve of the sleeve. And then what I'm going to do is to go ahead and mark where it ends. Okay, and after doing that, I'll just go ahead and cut this out, adding about 1/4 of an inch, because we're going to use a bias tape to sort of like turn this part out. So after using the bias tape around this point, all I need to do is to place it on the dress with right sides touching. Make sure that I match the seam, and I'm going to go ahead and sew this part by 1/2 inch seam allowance. Repeat the same thing for the other side as well. Go ahead and sew by a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then for the other sleeve, what I'm going to do is to match the center of the sleeve head to the shoulder seam around the armhole area. I'll equally repeat the same thing, match the seam on the sleeve to the side seam of the dress, and I'll go on to sew it all around with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So after sewing on the sleeves, the next thing that I'm going to do is to fix in my zipper. We should all know how to fix zips to our dresses by now, and after fixing my zip, I'm going to hem the bottom of my dress. By fixing my zip, I'm not going to close the entire center back. I'm going to leave a little bit of space, around 8 inches, for ease of working with this dress because it is a long dress. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, kindly give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, turn on the bell so you get updates when I post new videos, and I'm going to see you in my next tutorial. Bye.